Hi, this is Scott with ClaySys, and what I'll be demonstrating today is how to set up what is commonly referred to either as synchronized or cascading drop-down boxes. You may have a scenario where you've added a couple of drop-down boxes to your form, and what you'd like to implement is the ability to have the user to select an item from the first drop-down box, and then the second one would only show those items that match what that user selected in the first. So to do that today, I'm going to be using two different SharePoint lists as the data source for my dropdowns. One is called States2, which simply shows some of the states here in the US, and the other is called Cities2, again showing just some of the cities, but you can also see I have a state column so that I can specify which state that city comes from. For instance, Baltimore, Maryland, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Raleigh, North Carolina, etc. So for this demonstration, I've already set up a form with a couple of drop-down boxes on it. What we're going to walk through today is how to configure the data sources for each of these drop-down boxes so you can effectively set up synchronized or cascading drop-downs in your form. So the first thing we'll do is select the state drop-down box, CBX Select State. Again, this one is going to show those state abbreviations from my States2 SharePoint list. Over on the right is the Properties pane. We're going to click on Data Source and then click the ellipses next to items to start this process. The first thing we need to do is specify where the data is coming from. Again, as I just shown, my data is coming from SharePoint, so we're going to choose SharePoint here in this option list and click OK. This screen simply shows you the various site collections that you have available to you, so I'm going to choose the one that I have for my demo called ClaySys and click Next. And this screen shows you all the lists and libraries that you have on that particular site collection. So we know, again, we're setting up our states drop-down box. So we're going to scroll down here and choose the States2 list and click Next. Now this screen gives you the ability to filter the data that comes back to the drop-down. However, this is effectively the first drop-down box in our process showing the states. So we want all the data. We don't want this to be filtered whatsoever. So for this demo, we'll leave this screen as it is set up and simply click Next. On this screen, it gives you the ability to determine if you want to show one thing to the user but actually store something else. For instance, we know that in this case we're showing state abbreviations. Do we want to store the state abbreviation, or do we actually want to store the SharePoint ID for the state that that user selects? So for this demonstration, I want to both show and store the state abbreviation. So I'm going to choose both for the title field. Again, title represents my state abbreviation. So there, now we've got that set, we'll click Next. This screen gives us two things. One, the ability to determine if we want the data to be sorted in the drop-down box. For this demo, I do. So I want it sorted by my state abbreviation, my title field, in ascending order. And then to get this to be actually set up, I need to click the Add button. That is what sets up this actual sort specification in the form. Now the next thing we need to do is determine when do we want this data in the drop-down box to be available. Since this is our first drop-down box showing the states, we want it to be there when the form loads, and we don't want the user to have to do anything to actually get that data to appear. So to get that set up, we're going to click Add Trigger, and the trigger we want to add is Form Load. In other words, execute this data connection, populate my drop-down box when the form loads. So select the Form Load trigger and click Create Rule. Now in just a moment, we'll go take a look at what happens under the covers when we click this Create Rule button. Now we're done setting up the data source. We're going to click Finish. And as I mentioned to you, we'll now switch over to the Rule tab. And here you can see when we click that Create Rule button, what happened is we created this on Form Load rule. It uses the fill data sync method, and simply that means we're going to execute that data source and populate the results into the drop-down box called CBX Select State. So to show you that briefly, we'll flip over again to the Designer tab, click Preview Form, and as you can see now, when I choose my drop-down for Select State, it has those state abbreviations coming from my State2 list. So the next step in this process is how do we set up the data source for the Select City drop-down to show, in this case, only those cities that match or come from California. So we'll close our preview. We will then select CBX Select City, and we're going to now run through the same basic steps that we did for setting up the state data source. Over here on the right, Again, we'll choose data source. We'll click the ellipses next to items. Again, cities 2 is a SharePoint list, so we're going to choose SharePoint here and click OK. It's coming from our ClaySys site collection, so click Next. We know the list that we want for this to show this data is coming from cities 2, so we'll choose that and click Next. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment because in this case now, for our Select City dropdown, we do want this data to be filtered, right? We want it to be filtered based upon what the user has selected from the state dropdown. So now this is where we're going to wind up using that state column in the cities 2 list that I had shown you previously. Effectively what we're doing is saying, bring me back all the data from the cities 2 list where the state is equal to what the user selected in CBX select state. That is how we set up the dynamic filtering. So once that's configured, we now click Next. Once again, I want to show and store the title, in this case the city, so I'm choosing both here for title. Once again, I want this data to be sorted as well, again by the city or title in ascending order. Now for the trigger though, we do not want this data to be there when the form opens, right? We don't want this to appear until the user has selected a value from the select state drop-down box. So we'll click on Add Trigger here. We want our trigger to be select state drop-down, so we select that and click Create Rule. We're again done with our data source wizard here. And we'll quickly switch over to the Rule tab. Here is our original rule on form load that populates the state drop-down box. But here's our new one. This rule gets fired when the user makes a selection from the state drop-down box. We'll go execute that data source, and this time we're going to fill our select city drop-down with those filtered results. So let's take a look at that. Let's switch back over to Designer, click Preview Form, and now when I select, say, California for my state drop-down box, the data source gets executed, and now my cities drop-down box shows me just those cities from California. Now if I go back up and change this to, let's say, Maryland, that data source gets re-executed again, and now my city drop-down box only shows me those cities from Maryland. It is really that simple to set up synchronized drop-down boxes using ClaySys AppForms. I hope you found this demonstration beneficial. We're going to be doing more of these how-to type videos in coming weeks. However, if there is something specific you'd like to see in a demo that's not there now, please feel free to email us using the feedback link below, info@claysys.com. Remember, visit our site often, www.claysys.com/pages/viewdemo.aspx, as we're going to be adding new videos on a frequent basis. Thank you for using ClaySys AppForms.